Okay, so this is our last week of February, so it's the last week I'll work on this particular project. Um, so a few different projects coming up over the next couple of months. So the next one is portraits. So if you wanted to do something portraits, if you don't, that's absolutely fine. But if you did, that's what I'll cover in the next couple of weeks. And I'll start off with a drawing session. So if you fancy just doing drawing, that's fine. If you wanted to work it into painting, that's absolutely fine too. You can apply the drawing ideas to a painting. It won't be any, well, for some people it'll be new, but for a lot of you it'll be me going over the same ground again, the way I tend to go about portraits. So I'll keep that going for a few weeks, perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, something like that, 3 or 4 weeks perhaps. Yeah, so that's that one. And yeah, as I say, this is the last week on this one. So what I thought I'd do today is a little bit, so a couple of weeks ago we had a look at colour mixing, and I did a refresher of the basics of colour mixing using primary colours. This book I've been using and bought last year, painting into the light, so this was sort of the inspiration for this theme. I thought it would be a nice theme. What I thought was quite interesting was the colours she uses, and she does use the primary colours, but she also uses quite a few secondary colours in her mixes. So she'll use something like an orange, a green, and a purple. And she doesn't seem to use browns. So I thought, well, that's quite interesting. She's basically got one each of the primary colours and then one each of the secondary colours and some white. And I'm always quite interested in just trying different palettes, limited palettes, and sometimes if you limit the amount of colours you're using, it can really push you to try and experiment with colour mixes. So I'm going to try and have a go at this. Now obviously this is mostly grey, so it's using colours to mix greys, but you can get some nice interesting greys by using colours to mix rather than just blacks and whites or browns and blues, that sort of thing. So that's where I thought I'd go with this. So yeah, with something like this, I'll just paint a passage through it, and this was the demo I did on Tuesday, so that was Tuesday's demo. Just using acrylics. What I suggest, if you want to draw any sections out, obviously you've got like these buildings in the background. I tend to use a pastel pencil, and that's a bit darker than it needs to be honest. Something where you can just about see the colour or the tone would be absolutely fine. With acrylics, the paint dries really quickly, and if you're using canvas, you'll find that if you use a graphite pencil, it's quite hard to remove if you want to make any adjustments. So for that reason, I quite like a pastel pencil, and I can very easily rub bits out. And if I use a light colour, like this one, I'll do it with this one just so you can see it. These colours should just blend in with the paint. If I don't make it, something like a pale grey, that's just going to merge in. So I'm just going to try and get an overall shape for these buildings. We've got these ones here that like that. The windows and any kind of architectural details, I will work those in as I go, perhaps on the next layer. So, and then Nelson's column will come in about here. This is a little bit rough and sketchy, but that's going there, and then the fountain here. The people themselves, I will just leave at this stage. If you wanted, you could put a few in, but in some ways it might, with acrylics, it's going to be easier to just pop those over the top. So that's where the fountain will be. Some brushes. And then the next stage is really just work background to foreground and block some colours in. So the sky, we've got some slightly bluey colours in there, sort of around here. So I picked up the wrong colour there. So some little bit of blue and white just in there. That's a little bit stronger. Yeah. Some more blue. So if I just maybe paint a little passage through this, but you would, you know, I would ideally complete the sky. You'll find that acrylic paint, if you've not used it before, dries very, very quickly. That is almost drying already. So that could be that bit. These bits here, I'm going to try and mix a sort of lavendery, purpley grey. So I've got some purple, a bit of water, so that's a little bit. And what else let's try a little bit of orange in that. So again, just trying to sort of make that a bit greyer. So I've added some green and some orange. So come up with something like that, which to me is a bit closer to the colours that are there. One of the things with acrylics is they will dry slightly darker than they are wet. So that's just something to be aware of. And another thing you could do, if you wanted to check your colours, is to just get a piece of plastic, find a bit. So something like one of these sheets, and you can kind of offer it up and just see how close you are to the colour. So that looks fairly good. Maybe make that a little bit less purpley. So again, adding a little bit more green, a little bit more orange, and start to just kind of work that in. Just a tiny bit lighter in places. Top it's a bit lighter. And using, this is quite a squarish brush, so they're quite nice painting buildings where you've got lots of sharp edges. It's a little bit darker again, go back to the slightly darker mix. So start something like that. Let's just get some colours and tones everywhere. As I say, this is going to dry very, very quickly. So I can then break that up and bring slightly lighter bits like this. Or I can work into it a little bit while it's still wet. A bit lighter there. These rooftops are quite light. Slightly darken the sky, but not much. Okay, this might be a bit too big a brush. Let's get something in for there. And then gradually work my way down. Slightly bigger brush for the next bit. This beigey grey. So again, I'll start with purple, a little bit of water, some white, and I'm basically also mixing it in with the mix I had already. I think a little bit more orange, just to add in there, and a tiny bit of yellow. So I think that would be quite reasonably close. Something that feels a bit light, isn't it? Let's make that a bit darker. Yeah, that's probably a bit closer. I think once that's dried, that's going to look all right. So it's quite dark around here. And this bit here is reflecting a lot of light. So I'll get another brush and just put some almost like white, or white with a hint of colour in there. White and just the tiniest bit of yellow in there just to warm it up a little bit. And where the sun's bouncing off the wet pavement, you get this really blindingly light reflection. blend that out a little bit. While that's still wet, I can blend that to an extent. Something like that. With the smaller brush, I'm just thinking about, just talk a little bit about painting the big room. So I just need a small brush for that. So where it's very, very light, they, to me, appear slightly lighter than they do over here. And it's also almost like a technique or a device you can use to try and give that impression of light. So I'm going to deliberately keep these fairly light here. So again, same sort of mixes, maybe a little bit purple and green to make a grey, green grey. A little bit of the orange actually, just to warm that up. So I wanted some people in here. Now this is wet still, so it's going to blend in a little bit. But you know, that would dry pretty quickly, so I could just have them. But I think that's, you know, that should work okay, having that sort of tone. They're not too, yeah, I really need to let that dry, but not too dark. And then we've also got the shadows, and because the sun's over here, these people on this side, they get the shadows are going to radiate out this way. Here they're coming down this way, and obviously here they go that way, which I quite like. I like that sort of dramatic kind of shadows coming out. So these people's shadows, they're just a little bit about there, something a bit like that. Whereas somebody over here, I would paint perhaps a little bit darker, like a nice dark colour. Just mixing all the dark colours together. Just doing a little bit too blue, so I'll add a little bit of, adding a little bit of orange there just to make it a little bit browner. So somebody over here, I would paint quite a bit darker. So I'll do it on a dry bit. So that they could be sketching a little bit darker, a bit like that. And same sort of thing with their shadows, not quite as dark as they are in themselves, but their shadows will sort of radiate out. This bit is steps, so that's why they're almost like going up the steps. Something a bit like that.
That is amazing that you've got orange in every colour. I just don't know how you get the colours.
Yeah, well, I thought it was something to try.
It comes out like that.
Yeah, it's not something I've really tried very much of, but I just thought it'd be quite interesting, just because of, you know, that the book wherever it's gone.
Yeah.
Just seeing that kind of palette that she uses, and I quite like some of the colour mixes she comes up with in the painting. So I thought it's just nice to experiment really.
The beige paper, the colour of the paper is quite interesting.
This pinky colour, yeah. I primed up some of these old boards yesterday, and I just use anything that's lying around. So this was a bit of masonry paint. It was pink, and I mixed it with the white, and just made that kind of up. I quite like that as a colour, or grey is quite nice. You know, just something with a little bit of tone, and I find a bit easier to work into. With that one with the white, you know, it's okay, but I need to get rid of the white quite quickly. So. But again, with acrylics, the white will go quite quickly anyway. But yeah, that's basically how I build it up. So once this is dry, and that is virtually dry now. That if you know, once you're at that stage, you could then go back in and put any little details. If you wanted to suggest a few windows, things like that. I'll do them a little bit darker and heavier, but they're not that dark. But you know, you could then do any details that you've got on the buildings. So it's sort of having a layer, let that dry, and then working into it. So acrylics are quite nice for these sort of subjects where you've got a lot of hard edges, a lot of one thing over the top of another. There's not too much to blend in some of these, so it's quite a nice medium for that. That's something I might experiment a little bit more with over when I go outdoors. I mostly paint with oils outdoors, but I might try the acrylics. Just from this point of view, being able to get something dry and then paint over the top.
It's easier than watercolour.
This, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's much easier, much more forgiving.
Yeah.
Kind of obliterate things, and nobody would really know if they need to. So.
And what kind of paper is that you're using now?
This is just a bit of board. I tend to paint on this
You
is
say
hardboard.
board,
This one,
Hardboard.
just a bit of hardboard. I tend to use well, there's quite a variety. So that's acrylic paper, which I wasn't over fond on. It's flattened out now actually, but it really cockled when I first started. I quite like boards just because they're a little bit rigid. That's ordinary paper on that one, and I primed it. I think it was watercolour paper actually, but it had a bit of a stain on it, so I just primed it with some primer. This is hardboard. The other bit of board I had around is MDF. Yeah, I think this is MDF, this one. So just, or it might even be just a piece of cardboard. I can't remember. But MDF's good. You can get like thin 3 or 4 millimetre MDF. Canvas is fine. So this other one was on a piece of, just a floppy piece of canvas, which I've got loads of this. If anybody wants some of this, I've got big in this. So I've got loads of canvas. And you could then either stick that to a board, or you could stretch it around a canvas stretcher to let it stay. That's another option. Yeah, I think I use boards a lot just because they're sort of fairly strong and rigid, easier, and particularly for demos, and we'll just keep climb over that and do another one in a couple of weeks' time. Yeah, so that's what I tend to do. All good?
Yeah.
So for next week, if you do want to do some sort of portrait, you want to work on that, try and find some sort of photograph or image that you'd like to work on. Ideally a reasonable size. So most of the ones I've got are some of the things I've printed off the internet. Obviously you're welcome to use any of these if you want. Some of these are ones people have given me. Some are just sort of like cuttings out of magazines, that sort of thing. So yeah, and I've got a few more at home somewhere. What I wouldn't suggest is anything like that where you've got somebody smiling. Smiles are quite difficult. Something like a nice neutral expression, nice lighting, like something. But as I say, if you want to use any of my images, you're very welcome. I'll bring some more in there. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, sure.